guys, tonight we're taking you on a journey through India, but not the India of colorful festivals and chai-scented mornings. No, tonight you're stepping into the shadows that stretch across ancient villages, the whispers that echo through abandoned forts, and the inexplicable moments when reality bends just enough to let something else slip through. You're about to encounter legends so deeply woven into the fabric of this vast country that even skeptics pause before dismissing them entirely. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your favorite urban legend from anywhere in the world. I love reading those. Now settle into your pillows, dim those lights, and let your mind wander with me into the eerie heart of India. Your journey begins at the edge of exhaustion, which is somehow fitting for what you're about to experience. You find yourself standing on the outskirts of Kuldhara as dusk settles like a morning veil across the Rajasthan desert. The village stretches before you, not ruined exactly, but profoundly empty, as though everyone simply stood up mid-conversation 200 years ago and walked away forever. And that's essentially what happened. The Paliwal Brahmins who lived here, prosperous and peaceful, abandoned every single home overnight. You walk slowly down the main pathway, fine desert sand crunching beneath your feet in the heavy silence, and you can almost hear the phantom echoes of children laughing, women singing, merchants haggling over spices and cloth. But those sounds never quite materialize into something you can point to and say, yes, there, I heard it clearly. Instead, there's only the wind, persistent and mournful, carrying with it the weight of a curse that has lasted centuries. See, when the minister demanded the village chief's daughter for marriage, a twisted, tyrannical demand backed by threats of violence and taxation, the entire community chose honor over submission. They vanished into the desert darkness in perfect silence, but not before pronouncing a curse. No one would ever successfully settle here again. You reach out to touch a crumbling door frame, the sandstone still warm from the day's sun, and for just a second you swear you feel a child's handprint pressing against your palm from the other side, small and urgent. Paranormal investigators have reported exactly this. Handprints appearing on car windows after dark, shadows moving with purpose through empty courtyards, voices speaking in dialects no longer used anywhere else in Rajasthan. You pull your hand back quickly, your skin prickling as though a mild electric current just passed through it. The curse holds. It always has. And standing here in the gathering darkness, watching the first stars emerge over the abandoned rooftops, you understand why. Some places don't want to be inhabited again, and this is one of them. The desert heat becomes oppressive as you continue east along the Pali-Jodhpur highway, where something altogether different awaits you. The asphalt shimmers with heat mirages that make the horizon waver like a lie, and you're approaching a roadside shrine that appears suddenly through the distortion, modest but meticulously maintained, with fresh flowers that seem impossibly bright in this dusty landscape. What you see there makes you slow your steps, then stop entirely. It's a Royal Enfield motorcycle garlanded with marigolds and roses, surrounded by offerings of liquor, specifically Bullet brand beer, as if the universe has a sense of irony about branding and mortality. This is the shrine of Bullet Baba, and the story pulls you in despite yourself. Ombana died here in 1998, his bike wrapped around a tree, his life extinguished in an instant of impact and twisted metal. The police did what police do, towed the motorcycle to the station, drained its fuel, locked it up as evidence or abandoned property, documented everything properly. By morning, it had returned to the accident site, standing upright exactly where Ombana had died. They retrieved it again, more carefully this time, chaining it inside the station. It returned again, and again. After the fourth or fifth time, even the authorities surrendered to the inexplicable, and locals built this shrine where the motorcycle now rests permanently, becoming a deity in its own right. You watch as the truck driver stops, climbs down from his cab with visible reverence, and places a garland on the handlebars before continuing his journey. He doesn't honk. No one does near this shrine. Honking is considered profoundly disrespectful, and disrespecting Bullet Baba, they say, invites misfortune on the road ahead. Accidents, breakdowns, worse things that don't have names. You stand there in the heat, feeling the strange sanctity of the place, and wonder if Om Bana's spirit truly inhabits this machine, protecting travelers from the same fate he suffered, or if collective belief has given it a power all its own. Maybe there's no difference. Maybe belief is power, and power is belief. And standing here, sweating in the Rajasthan sun, you're willing to hedge your bets by bowing slightly before moving on. As night deepens and the temperature finally begins to drop, you find yourself drawn northeast, across states and ecosystems, toward Assam, where the village of Jatinga waits in its monsoon shroud. The journey takes hours, or maybe days. Time moves strangely when you're chasing legends, and you arrive during that peculiar window between September and November when the phenomenon occurs. The locals barely look up anymore when you ask about it. They've seen this too many times, answering your questions with the weary patience of people who've explained the inexplicable so often it's become mundane. But you haven't seen it, not yet. You stand at the edge of the village as fog rolls thick and wet through the valley, so dense you can barely see your own hands when you hold them out in front of you. And then you see them. Birds, dozens of them, disoriented and frantic, flying lower than they should, their movements jerky and wrong, like puppets with tangled strings. One crashes into a tree near you with a sickening crack, the sound of hollow bones snapping. Then another falls in straight from the sky, neck broken at an impossible angle, and another, and another. The villagers murmur about evil spirits possessing the birds, forcing them into this mass suicide, drawing them down from their natural flight paths to deaths that serve no evolutionary purpose. Scientists have offered theories, of course. The fog and rain disorienting their navigation systems, the lights from the village confusing their sense of direction, geomagnetic anomalies in this particular valley. But even they admit the explanations feel incomplete, failing to account for why it happens in this specific location, during this specific time frame, with this specific tragic consistency year after year. You watch a beautiful migratory bird, its feathers iridescent even in the dim light, spiral downward with one wing bent at an impossible angle, and you understand viscerally why this place has earned its dark reputation. There's something profoundly wrong in the air here during monsoon season. Something that turns the instinct for survival inside out and makes death seem like the more reasonable option. You need to move, to shake off the heavy sorrow of Jatinga that clings to your clothes, like the persistent mist. So you travel to Delhi, where urban legends take on a more confined, almost claustrophobic quality, pressed tight by millions of people living in close quarters. With their fears, you find yourself standing before Malcha Mahal as darkness falls, and immediately you understand why journalists who entered here never returned to file their stories. The building hunches in the forest, like a predator in waiting, its walls thick with secrets and isolation, windows dark despite the hour when lights should be turning on for evening. This was where the descendants of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah retreated after a brutal legal battle that dragged through years and left them financially and emotionally devastated, where a mother and her 2 children sealed themselves away from a world that had stripped them of everything: dignity, property, connection. The mother committed suicide within these walls, leaving her children with treasure and trauma in equal measure, with the property itself and the crushing weight of generations of royalty reduced to ruin. Guards from the nearby Earth Center will tell you, if you can get them to talk at all, which isn't easy, about seeing figures in the windows, shadows that move with purposeful grace through rooms that should be empty. About journalists' cars parked outside for hours before driving away empty. The journalists themselves never emerging, their stories never filed, their colleagues growing frantic with worry. About the sense that the Mahal doesn't want to be disturbed, that it's actively hostile to intrusion, protecting whatever remains inside from the outside world's gaze. You don't attempt to enter. Something in the architecture itself, in the way shadows pool around the entrance, like deep water, warns you away with a directness that bypasses rational thought and speaks to something more primitive in your nervous system. You take your photographs from a respectful distance, capturing the facade in the dying light, and you leave before full darkness falls. But Delhi has more to offer your unease. You find yourself descending the steps of Agrasen Ki Baoli, an ancient stepwell that plunges deep into the earth like an inverted temple, each step down feeling heavier than the last, as though gravity itself intensifies with depth. The water at the bottom, dark and perfectly still, has a legendary reputation that even locals speak of in whispers. People say it calls to them, whispers suggestions in voices that sound like their own thoughts, makes drowning seem like the most reasonable idea in the world. You stop halfway down, suddenly dizzy, gripping the stone wall for balance. The stone is cool despite the Delhi heat, almost unnaturally cool, and the texture under your fingertips is worn smooth by centuries of other hands gripping this same spot. Behind you, you hear footsteps, not echoes of your own, but separate, distinct, following at a different rhythm. You turn quickly. Nothing, just empty steps stretching upward toward the light. But the sensation of being followed persists, growing stronger rather than fading as you descend further into the well's depths. Visitors report this constantly. The feeling of a presence just behind them, just out of sight, patient and persistent, matching their pace, whether they speed up or slow down. You make a decision very quickly that you don't need to reach the bottom after all. Some destinations aren't worth the journey, and whatever is down there by the dark water can stay there without your company. You climb back up, and with each step toward daylight, the presence behind you grows more insistent, almost angry at your departure. You don't look back until you've cleared the top step and you're standing in the full sunlight again, breathing hard, your heart racing. Behind you, the stepwell entrance yawns open like a mouth, and you can't shake the feeling that something is standing just inside, waiting for the next curious visitor to descend. The night is far from over. You make your way through Delhi cantonment's more desolate stretches, where streetlights flicker uncertainly and the roads stretch empty in a city that never seems to truly sleep. This is where she appears, they say, the woman in the white sari. You've heard the stories, of course, collected them from taxi drivers and late-night security guards and people who drive these roads because they have no choice. She flags down cars, they say, asks politely for a ride in a voice that sounds normal except for something just slightly off in the cadence. And if refused, she sprints alongside the vehicle at impossible speeds, her face pressed against the window, grinning with too many teeth, her eyes reflecting the headlights like an animal's. You're walking, not driving, which somehow feels both safer and more vulnerable. Walking means you're moving at human speed, means you're not protected by metal and glass, means you're exposed to the night air and whatever moves through it. The wind picks up, carrying that distinctive Delhi dust that gets into everything, and for just a moment you see her, or think you do, at the edge of your vision. White fabric, billowing in wind that shouldn't be strong enough to move it like that. Dark hair, obscuring a face that you're simultaneously desperate and terrified to see clearly. But when you turn to look directly, there's only an empty road and the distant sound of traffic and your own heartbeat, loud in your ears. You make very sure to keep moving, to not stop, to not do anything that might be interpreted as an invitation. You head west now toward Mumbai, where the urban legends take on the frenzied energy of the city itself, amplified by millions of people living on top of each other in a space that was never meant to hold this many dreams and nightmares. Grand Parade Towers rises before you, 28 stories of gleaming glass and buried tragedy, and you stand across the street with your neck craned back, counting floors and trying to calculate the physics of falling. This building in Malabar Hill has seen so many residents leap from their balconies that the Housing Society now conducts mandatory counseling sessions, trying desperately to break whatever curse or pattern has taken hold here. You wonder what it is about this particular building, what combination of architecture and anguish that makes people choose the same terrible ending again and again. Some blame its proximity to the Tower of Silence, that Zoroastrian site where the dead are left for vultures to consume, suggesting that the boundary between life and death has worn thin here, that something about the nearness of all that death makes dying seem more accessible, less final. You watch windows for movement, and occasionally you see it. A curtain shifting, a silhouette pausing on a balcony, but you can't tell if it's the living or echoes of those who jumped. The building itself doesn't look haunted. It looks expensive and well-maintained and utterly ordinary, which somehow makes it worse. Tragedy doesn't announce itself with cobwebs and broken windows. Sometimes it wears a nice suit and has a doorman. Nearby, the foul-smelling Mahim Creek curves through the city like an open sewer, which is essentially what it is. A dumping ground for industrial waste and human refuse, and everything Mumbai wants to forget. You arrive just in time to hear an old woman recounting the miracle of 2006, her voice rising with excitement, even as her hands gesture at water that now looks and smells exactly as polluted as you'd expect. But she insists, with the fervor of someone who was there and saw it with her own eyes, that one day after heavy rains, the creek turned sweet sweet. The water that had been toxic for decades suddenly flowed clean and drinkable, and people drank from it, bathed in it, filled containers to take home, believing it to be a divine blessing from Sufi Saint Makhdoom Ali Mahimi, whose shrine stands nearby. By the next day, it had returned to its usual toxic state, the miracle lasting just long enough for thousands to experience it, but not long enough for scientists to properly study it. Geologists explained it away. Underground freshwater discharge from aquifers disrupted by the rainfall, a temporary mixing of clean and polluted water. But the faithful weren't interested in geology. They'd tasted sweetness in a place that had only ever been bitter, and no scientific explanation could take that away from them. Sometimes you realize watching her animated gestures, people need miracles more than they need explanations. Need to believe that something divine can break through into this world even briefly, even in a polluted creek in the middle of Mumbai. You venture to Airy Colony after midnight, despite every instinct screaming at you to stay in well-lit, populated areas where reason and witnesses provide safety in numbers. The forest presses close to the road here, dark and whispering with sounds that don't quite resolve into identifiable sources, and you understand immediately why locals avoid night drives through this area. The trees seem too attentive, their branches reaching toward the road in ways that feel deliberate rather than random. The shadows move with purpose that has nothing to do with wind patterns or passing headlights. You hear rustling in the undergrowth that doesn't quite match the wind's rhythm, and once, just once, you glimpse what might be eyes reflecting your phone's light, far too high off the ground to belong to any common animal, far too steady in their gaze to be anything startled by your presence. You walk faster, not quite running, but close, your shoes slapping the pavement in a rhythm that sounds too loud in the oppressive quiet, and you don't look back until you've reached a busier street where the normal sounds of Mumbai traffic wrap around you like a protective blanket. Even then, you have the unsettling sensation that something followed you to the edge of the forest and is still there, watching from the tree line, waiting patiently for the next person to be foolish enough to walk through Airy after dark. The journey takes you south to Karnataka now, to the village of Pavagada, where the past holds a secret so dark that even decades later, people speak of it in whispers, looking over their shoulders as though the perpetrators might still be listening. You arrive in daylight this time. You're learning to time your arrivals better. And you listen to the elderly villagers recount 1983, when young girls began disappearing with a regularity that turned normal childhood into a calculated risk. Not just vanishing the way children sometimes do, wandering off and getting lost, but being taken with such precision that only paw prints remained at the abduction sites. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just the girls gone and wolf tracks pressed into the dirt. The deaths were initially attributed to man-eating wolves, which made a certain terrible sense. Wolves have killed humans in India. The historical record confirms hundreds of deaths in the late 1800s. Entire villages living in terror of packs that developed a taste for human flesh. But then the details emerged that didn't fit the simple narrative of animal predation. Only young girls, only within a certain age range, only at certain times. The bodies, when found, arranged in ways that spoke of ritual rather than feeding. The skulls carefully placed. The absence of the kind of damage wolves inflict when they're hungry. Suspicions turned dark. Tantric rituals requiring virgin blood. human sacrifices to goddess Kali performed by practitioners of black magic, cults operating in the forest beyond the village boundaries. The truth was never fully established, which somehow makes it worse. There were arrests, confessions that were later recanted, trails of evidence that led nowhere conclusive. You look at the village around you, so ordinary in daylight, with children playing and women hanging laundry and men gathered around tea stalls, and you try to imagine what it was like when every sunset brought terror, when parents counted their daughters obsessively and locks meant nothing against whatever was taking them. You need altitude, distance, perspective, so you travel to Meghalaya, to the Nokkalakai Falls, where tragedy has been frozen into geological beauty. The journey through the mountains is harrowing, switchback roads with sheer drops and occasional shrines, marking places where vehicles have gone over the edge. But when you finally reach the viewing point and see the falls, the danger of the journey suddenly makes sense. The water plunges over 1,100 feet in a single unbroken sheet, and you stand there feeling the mist on your face, tasting it on your lips, and listen to the legend of Kali Kai. Her story is almost unbearably cruel, the kind of narrative that makes you wonder why humans tell these stories at all, why we preserve such pain in our collective memory. Kali Kai remarried after her first husband's death, devoted to her infant daughter, working long hours as a porter to provide for them both. Her new husband, poisoned by jealousy over the love and attention she gave the child, murdered the little girl while Kali Kai was away working. He cooked the flesh, hiding the crime in plain sight as a meal. Kali Kai came home exhausted and hungry, and unknowingly consumed what he'd prepared. Only when she found her daughter's severed fingers in the basket did she understand what she'd eaten, what she'd lost, what her husband had done. Her mind shattered in that moment, splintering under the weight of horror, too great for consciousness to contain intact. She ran blindly through the forest, still clutching her daughter's fingers, and came to this cliff. She didn't hesitate. She leaped, choosing the void over a world that contained such cruelty. The name Nokkalakai literally means the jump of Kali Kai in Kasi, commemorating her choice, making sure her story isn't forgotten even as centuries pass. You stare at the water far below, churning white where it impacts the pool, and you understand why this place carries such weight. Every droplet of water that falls seems to carry her grief forward through time, an endless repetition of that moment when she chose death over memory. But Meghalaya has other legends too, and you find yourself drawn to the caves of Cherrapunji, home to the Thlin. The caves open into the hillside like wounds, dark and exhaling cool air that smells of minerals and secrets and things that have been underground too long. The Thlin, in local Kasi lore, is a massive serpent that once demanded human sacrifices to stop its indiscriminate killing of villagers. Its hunger insatiable, its power too great to challenge directly. The people eventually found a way to kill it, or so the official story goes. But unexplained murders in the region are still sometimes attributed to Thlin worshippers, people who supposedly feed the evil spirit in exchange for prosperity, maintaining a dark pact that predates modern law. You don't venture deep into the caves. The entrance alone, dark and exhaling that strange, cool breath, is enough to make your skin crawl and your ancient hindbrain start screaming warnings about enclosed spaces and things that live in darkness. You take a few careful steps inside, just far enough to say you've been in the Thlin's cave, and the darkness presses against you like a physical presence, heavy and aware. You retreat quickly to the sunlight, breathing hard, and you notice that none of the locals have followed you, even this far into the cave mouth. They watch from a distance, and you wonder if they're judging your foolishness or simply bearing witness in case you don't come back out. The Garo Hills beckon next, promising India's own version of Bigfoot in the legend of Manda Barung. Forest officials insist it's folklore, nothing more than local mythology mixed with misidentification of known animals and the human tendency to create monsters in the spaces where knowledge ends. But the sightings continue regardless of official dismissals. Villagers describe it in consistent detail. Nearly 10 feet tall, weighing around 300 kilograms, covered in black and gray fur, moving through the forest with surprising grace for something so massive. Herbivorous, they insist, generally avoiding humans but occasionally visible at forest edges during dusk when the light plays tricks but also reveals truths. You join a small group hiking into the hills, guided by a local who claims his grandfather saw Manda Barung decades ago and described it in detail that matched all the other accounts. The forest here feels primordial in a way that's hard to articulate, not threatening exactly, but old, capable of hiding anything, indifferent to human presence in a way that reminds you how recently your species arrived and how easily it could be erased. You're hoping for a glimpse, while secretly relieved when the hike produces nothing more than beautiful views and aching legs. The guide seems almost disappointed, but you understand that some mysteries serve us better unconfirmed, existing in that space between possibility and proof where wonder lives. Traveling back to Rajasthan, you approach Pangar Fort with considerable trepidation and a careful eye on your watch. This is India's most infamous haunted location, so notorious that the Archaeological Survey of India has prohibited entry after sunset and before sunrise, with official signs posted warning visitors away after dark. That's not atmospheric embellishment for tourists, that's government policy, which lends the legend a legitimacy that most ghost stories lack. The ruins spread across the landscape in elegant decay, beautiful in the way that only abandoned grandeur can be, and two legends compete to explain its curse. One tells of a sadhu named Baba Balanath, who gave permission for the fort's construction with one condition: the building should never rise high enough to cast a shadow on his dwelling. This condition was ignored in the enthusiasm of building, and when the shadow finally fell across his home, he cursed the fort to destruction. The other legend speaks of a sorcerer named Singhiya who fell in love with Princess Ratnavati. When she rejected him, he tried to use black magic to force her love, but she discovered his plan and had him killed. With his dying breath, he cursed the fort and everyone in it to death without rebirth, trapping their spirits here forever. Either way, visitors report unexplained noises, apparitions, and a pervasive sense of being profoundly unwelcome. You arrive in late afternoon, planning to leave well before the prohibited hours. And even in daylight, the atmosphere presses against you. Tour groups speak in hushed voices here, as though the fort itself is listening. And you notice that no one ventures very far from the main group, as though isolation within these ruins would be particularly dangerous. You take your photographs and notes, and as the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, you leave with everyone else. A steady stream of visitors, all unconsciously hurrying toward the gates. before darkness can fall and trap them here. No one wants to test whether the legends are true, and looking back at the fort's silhouette against the reddening sky, you understand why completely. From Rajasthan, you move to Maharashtra, to Pune, where Shaniwar Wada stands as a monument to both architectural brilliance and terrible violence. This 18th century fortification, once the seat of the Peshwas who ruled the Maratha Empire, is said to be haunted by young Narayan Rao, who was brutally murdered here in 1773 at the age of 18. The details of his death are particularly cruel. Assassins in the pay of his own uncle, chasing him through these corridors while he screamed for help that never came. His dying words, Kaka, Malavachwa, or Uncle, save me, are still reportedly heard on full moon nights, the terror of that moment echoing forward through centuries. You visit during the day, walking through courtyards where fountains once played, and councils made decisions that shaped empires. The fort is partly ruined now, destroyed by a massive fire in 1828, but what remains is carefully preserved, and the atmosphere is surprisingly peaceful under the afternoon sun. But locals you speak with are adamant. Come back at night, particularly during a full moon, and listen. Some have recorded the sounds. Childlike cries for help. The word Kaka repeated desperately. Those skeptics dismiss them as wind or the calls of birds or simple audio pareidolia, the human tendency to hear patterns and meaning in random noise. Still, the story has persisted for over 2 centuries, passed down through generations who insist the haunting is real. And standing in the corridor where Narayan Rao allegedly died, you can almost hear it yourself. A phantom echo of terror that no amount of time has silenced. You travel next to Tamil Nadu, to the shore temple town of Mahabalipuram, where the legend of the 7 pagodas haunts the coastline like a promise or a warning. According to ancient tales, 6 magnificent shore temples once stood alongside the one that remains today, so beautiful and architecturally perfect that the gods themselves grew jealous. Divine jealousy being what it is, they submerged the 6 temples beneath the waves, leaving only one as a reminder of what had been lost. You stand on the beach at sunset, watching waves crash against the single surviving temple, its stones worn smooth by salt and time, and fishermen tell you that on very clear days at very low tides you can sometimes see structures beneath the water. Divers have reported finding ruins offshore, structured stones and carved pillars that seem too deliberate to be natural formations, lending credence to the legend. Some suggest the temples were simply lost to rising sea levels or erosion rather than divine intervention. But the mundane explanation seems insufficient, standing here watching the ocean pulse against the shore. You watch the horizon, imagining 6 ghost temples swallowed by divine jealousy, their beauty preserved in darkness beneath the waves. And you wonder what other marvels lie, drowned just beyond view. What other evidence of human ambition rests beneath the water, humbled by time and tides, and perhaps a touch of divine disapproval at our pride. In Kerala, the Lakiti Gateway awaits, a mountain pass shrouded in mist, and the legend of Karinthandan. He was a tribal chieftain who discovered this route through the mountains, navigating paths that no one else knew, making trade and travel possible through terrain that had been impassable. His reward for this service was betrayal. British engineers killed him and claimed credit for discovering the pass themselves, literally building their careers on his corpse. His spirit is said to haunt the pass still, seeking recognition or revenge, or simply refusing to depart from the place where he was wronged. Travelers report strange sounds, sudden chills even in warm weather, and an overwhelming sensation of being watched by hostile eyes. You drive through slowly, windows rolled up despite the Kerala heat that makes your shirt stick to your back and sweat pool in uncomfortable places. The mist clings so thick to the road that you can barely see 10 feet ahead, forcing you to slow to a crawl, and in that reduced visibility, your imagination finds plenty of space to work. Something moves in your peripheral vision. Again, always in that frustrating, not quite visible space where certainty dissolves into doubt. And you accelerate slightly, despite the poor visibility, not caring if it makes you look foolish to invisible witnesses. A chain hangs around a tree at one point along the route, supposedly binding Carinthandan's soul, and you don't slow down to examine it closely. Some chains are better left undisturbed. The journey takes you to West Bengal, to Kurseong, where Dao Hill has earned its reputation as one of Bengal's most intensely haunted locations. The Victoria Boys School and its surrounding woods have been the site of unsolved murders. Bodies found in conditions that suggest violence, but provide no clear suspects or motives. And witnesses describe headless figures walking the forest paths, shadowy presences in school corridors, even during holidays, when the building stands empty and locked. You visit in the gray light of an overcast afternoon, clouds pressing low and threatening rain, and even surrounded by the ordinary sounds of a hill station town. Traffic, vendors, children playing. The school building radiates wrongness. The windows seem to watch you as you approach, blank and dark, and somehow aware. The woods behind the school feel deliberately malevolent in a way that transcends normal forest atmosphere. And you understand why the road through them is called Death Road by locals who avoid it after dark. You take a few photographs, your phone's camera clicking in the silence, and you leave quickly, reviewing the images later and finding, predictably but still unsettlingly, what might be a figure in one of the background frames that you certainly didn't see while shooting. It's probably just a shadow, a trick of light and foliage, but it stands in an oddly human posture, and its position suggests it was watching you from the trees while you focused on the school building. Morgan House in Kalimpong beckons next, a colonial mansion where Lady Morgan has been cited so frequently that even the staff casually mention her presence the way they might mention the plumbing or the breakfast schedule. You book a room for the night because at this point you're either committed to the experience or you've gone slightly mad with curiosity overriding self-preservation. The building is beautiful, meticulously maintained despite its age, filled with period furniture and the scent of old wood and polish and something else underneath it all, something faintly musty that reminds you this place has seen generations come and go. But as night settles in and you lie in bed, trying to convince yourself that you are perfectly comfortable and definitely not regretting this decision, you hear footsteps in the corridor outside your room. They pace back and forth, purposeful, clear, the sound of someone walking with determination rather than wandering aimlessly. You lie still, barely breathing, waiting for them to pass your door and fade down the corridor. They don't. They pace, and when you finally summon the courage to open your door, moving slowly, quietly, as though stealth matters when dealing with the supernatural, the hallway is empty, completely empty, but the footsteps continue, just around the corner, always just out of sight. And you realize with a chill that runs down your spine like ice water that they're waiting for you to follow. You don't. Some invitations shouldn't be accepted, and you close your door gently, sliding the bolt home, even though you know intellectually that locks mean nothing to ghosts, and you spend the rest of the night lying awake, listening to Lady Morgan pace outside your room until dawn finally arrives to end the vigil. Traveling to Sikkim, you encounter a legend so extraordinary that even skeptics find it difficult to dismiss entirely. Harbhajan Singh, the soldier who still guards Nathula Pass despite dying in 1968. The story is documented official, maintained by the Indian Army itself, rather than existing solely in civilian folklore. A temple stands here in his honor, and the Army maintains his position on the roster, a bureaucratic acknowledgement of supernatural service. He receives a salary paid into an account managed by the temple. He's granted annual leave 2 months every year, with a first-class train berth reserved and 3 soldiers accompanying his spirit on the journey home to Punjab. His uniform is kept pressed, his boots polished, his presence felt. Fellow soldiers report experiences that sound like the setup for a ghost story, but are recounted with the matter-of-fact tone of operational debriefing. Feeling his presence during patrols, receiving warnings about security threats that turn out to be accurate, being guided away from dangerous areas by a voice they can't see, finding footprints in the snow that appear and disappear without any visible source. You speak with a young soldier who insists, with absolute conviction that doesn't allow for doubt or mockery, that Baba, as they call him with affection and respect, prevented him from stepping on a concealed crevasse during a nighttime patrol by grabbing his shoulder. The soldier spun around, saw no one, but heard a voice saying clearly, "Not there, son, go around." He trusts the legend completely, the way you trust gravity or sunrise, as simply a fact of existence at this altitude. Standing at the pass, wind cutting through your jacket like cold knives, and your breath visible in the thin air, you find it strangely comforting to imagine that someone's still keeping watch even beyond death, that duty and dedication can persist past the boundaries that usually contain them. The legend feels less like a ghost story and more like a testament to something we don't have adequate words for. Devotion so complete it refuses to end, even when life does. The legend of Banjakri in Sikkim takes you deeper into the forests, where the forest shaman is said to kidnap young boys, not with evil intent, but to train them as shamans themselves, ensuring the tradition continues beyond any single lifetime. It's an abduction, yes, but one framed as education, as calling, as necessary for cultural survival. The boys vanish from their villages, snatched during forest visits or even from their beds, and families mourn them as lost. But years later, sometimes decades later, they return as powerful shamans, capable of healing and divination and communication with spirits, speaking of their time with Banjakri in tones of reverence rather than trauma. Older villagers claim to know men who experienced this, who were taken as children and returned as shamans, their eyes changed in ways that have nothing to do with age, carrying knowledge that wasn't acquired through normal learning. You walk through these woods carefully, respectfully, and you're not sure what to make of it all. It's a legend that blurs every easy category between nightmare and calling, between abduction and education, between trauma and blessing. And in a way, that ambiguity might be the point. Not everything fits neatly into our frameworks of good and evil, threat and opportunity. Some experiences transform us in ways we can't evaluate until long afterward, and standing in these Sikkimese forests where every shadow could conceal a teacher or a threat, depending on perspective, you understand that maybe the legend isn't about what's true, but about how we make meaning from transformation. You return to Assam, but this time to the village of Mayong, on the banks of the Brahmaputra, known across India as the land of black magic. The reputation here isn't whispered. It's advertised, celebrated, preserved in museums and tourist brochures. The Mayong Central Museum displays ancient texts detailing tantric rituals, illusion techniques, transformation spells, manuscripts so old the paper has turned brown and fragile, the ink faded but still readable if you know the languages, which most modern visitors don't. Villagers will casually mention how their grandfather could turn people into animals, or how during ancient wars, an entire army of 100,000 soldiers supposedly disappeared upon entering Mayong's borders, vanishing completely without evidence of battle or retreat. You attend a demonstration where an old man performs tricks that your rational mind insists must be sleight of hand, must have logical explanations, but your eyes can't quite track the mechanisms. A coin vanishes from his palm and reappears inside a locked box that he hands you to open yourself, the key hanging around your neck the entire time. A rope climbs into the air with no support, rising like a snake, charmed by invisible music. And a boy climbs the rope until he's higher than the surrounding buildings before descending, just as impossibly. The old man smiles at your confusion and says something in Assamese that the translator renders as, Maya means illusion, but illusion is just truth that hasn't been understood yet. What you call magic, we call knowledge of how reality bends. You leave Myong with the uncomfortable suspicion that rationality might be a smaller territory than you'd always assumed, that the map of what's possible might have significantly more unexplored regions than you'd been taught to believe. Heading southwest to Goa, you encounter 3 roads that locals refuse to drive after dark, and taxi drivers will simply decline fares that require them to use these routes once the sun has set. Baidakol, Igor Chemband, and Yakniband. Each has its own distinct haunting, its own particular danger. At Baidakol, a stretch of road with an inexplicably high number of fatal accidents. A woman who died in a crash there now screams or laughs at passing drivers, causing them to startle and lose control, perpetuating the cycle of death that claimed her. At Igor Chemband, a mud road behind Our Lady of Snow's church, the hauntings occur strangely at midday, defying the usual midnight horror conventions, suggesting that whatever haunts this place doesn't respect our human assumptions about when ghosts should appear. At Yakniband, a temporary bridge that floods during monsoons, children's voices cry out after sunset during specific times of the year. The anniversary of some tragedy, locals suggest, though no one can agree on what exactly happened or when. You drive all 3 roads during the day, and even then, even with sunlight and occasional traffic, they feel wrong. The air seems thicker, harder to breathe, and the silence between sounds is deeper than it should be. When you pause to take photographs, the silence becomes oppressive, pressing against your ears like you're descending in an airplane. You make very sure to be elsewhere by the time darkness falls, taking the longer route back to your hotel without regret. In Gujarat, Duma Beach stretches along the coast at Surat, beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Seductive, inviting, revealing its threat only after you've committed. It was once a burial ground, and spirits are said to possess it after sunset, the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, worn thin by all those bodies laid to rest in the sand. Locals and tourists have vanished here over the years, their disappearances never satisfactorily explained, and those who walk the beach after dark report hearing whispers carried on the wind, feeling unseen hands pulling at their clothes with invisible fingers, seeing figures that dissolve when approached directly but remain visible in peripheral vision. You visit in late afternoon, watching families play in the waves, children building sandcastles, vendors selling chana and coconut water, everything appearing so normal that the dark legends seem impossible, like stories told to scare tourists rather than genuine warnings. But as the sun descends toward the horizon, painting the sky in orange and pink, you notice how quickly people pack up and leave. Families bundle their children into cars, vendors close their stalls with unusual haste, and by the time twilight arrives, the beach is nearly deserted. The atmosphere shifts palpably. The playful ocean sounds turn menacing, the waves seeming to reach farther up the sand as though grasping. You join the exodus without shame, understanding that some places have different rules after dark, and ignoring those rules is how people end up becoming cautionary tales themselves. Traveling north to Uttarakhand, you find the Lambi Dehar mines outside Mussoorie, abandoned now, but still exhaling the tragedy of the hundreds of workers who died here due to unsafe conditions, exploitation, and the simple fact that human lives were valued less than profit margins. The mine entrances yawn open like screaming mouths, dark apertures leading deep into the mountain, and visitors report hearing those screams echoing from underground, the spirits of miners still trapped in their final moments, reliving their deaths in an endless loop that no one can break. You approach one entrance carefully, respectfully, and the air emerging from it is cold, despite the warm afternoon, carrying a smell of minerals and decay, and something else you can't quite identify, but that makes your hindbrain scream warnings about danger and death. A sound reaches you, faint but distinct through the mountain silence. Metal striking stone, rhythmic, purposeful, distant. Mining sounds, the percussion of pickaxes against rock walls. But these mines have been closed for decades, sealed and abandoned, and there's no one inside making those sounds. No one living anyway. You back away slowly, leaving an offering of flowers that a local guide recommended. An apology, perhaps, for the exploitation that stole so many lives. An acknowledgement of suffering that was never properly recognized or compensated. At tunnel number 103 on the Kalka-Shimla railway line in Himachal Pradesh, passengers report seeing a British-era spirit attempting to converse with them in accented English, and a woman passing through the solid tunnel walls, as though matter is merely a suggestion rather than a rule. You take the train specifically to experience this tunnel, boarding in Kalka and claiming a window seat where you can watch the landscape shift as you climb into the mountains. As you enter the tunnel, the temperature drops sharply, cold air flooding the compartment and making passengers gasp and reach for jackets. The darkness is complete for several heartbeats. Absolute blackness that swallows even the train's interior lights. And in that darkness, you hear a voice speaking English with a British accent. the words unclear, but the tone urgent, insistent, as though trying to warn you of something important if only you could understand. Then you emerge into daylight, and everyone in the car is staring at each other with wide eyes, confirming that yes, they heard it too, that this wasn't individual imagination, but shared experience. An old woman crosses herself. A young man laughs nervously and makes a joke about colonial ghosts still working for the railway, but his hand shakes as he wipes sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Back in Uttar Pradesh, you investigate the legend of Muhnoshwa, the face scratcher that terrorized the region in 2002 with its nocturnal attacks, scratching people's faces and hands with enough force to draw blood, and in some cases, inflict injuries that led to death from infection or shock. Described by victims as emitting UFO-like light, this entity would appear suddenly in the darkness, attack with vicious speed, and vanish before anyone could get a clear look at it. The panic became so widespread, affecting hundreds of villages, that IIT Kanpur sent scientists to investigate, treating it as a serious phenomenon rather than mere hysteria. Their official conclusion: mass hysteria, triggered by a combination of fear, social contagion, and perhaps a few actual attacks by known animals that became exaggerated through retelling. But the scars remained real, the fear remained real, and one alleged Munoshwa captured in Lakhimpur Kheri, identified by scientists as a rare grasshopper, seemed woefully inadequate to explain the phenomenon's scope and intensity. You speak with survivors in a village that experienced multiple attacks, and they show you their scars. Faint now, but still visible as white lines across their cheeks and foreheads. They insist with quiet conviction that what attacked them was no grasshopper, no known animal, but something else entirely. Something that understood fear and fed on it. You believe them, or at least you believe that they experienced something traumatic and real, and that sometimes the scientific explanations, even when technically accurate, fail to capture the full truth of human experience. Delhi's Monkey Man legend pulls you back to the capital, where in 2001, panic spread through the streets as a hairy creature attacked people sleeping outdoors on roofs and balconies, a common practice during Delhi's brutal summer heat. It jumped between buildings with impossible agility, scratched victims with clawed hands, and caused at least 3 deaths when people fell from heights while fleeing its attacks. Descriptions varied wildly. Some said it had a monkey's face with sharp teeth. Others claimed it wore a helmet and metal armor. Some insisted it was 4 feet tall, while others swore it was over 6 feet. The inconsistency didn't help investigations, and no satisfying explanation emerged from police inquiries. Mass hysteria, the authorities concluded. But that doesn't explain the scratches, the genuine terror, the consistency of the attacks over several weeks. You stand on a rooftop in East Delhi where sightings were particularly common, looking across the cityscape of water tanks and television antennas and laundry lines stretching between buildings. The city spreads vast in every direction, and you wonder if it's still out there somewhere, watching, waiting for the next opportunity, or if it was ever really there at all, or if collective fear created something that became temporarily real through the power of shared belief, manifesting in attacks that were genuine even if the creature itself was impossible. Standing here in the heat with the city noise rising around you, you're not sure which explanation would be more unsettling. In Bangalore, during the 1990s, the Naleba legend gripped the city with fear of a witch who knocked on doors at night, perfectly mimicking the voices of residents' family members with uncanny accuracy that made people open their doors, believing their mother or husband or child was calling them. If you opened the door, death followed, sometimes immediately, sometimes within days, but inevitably and horribly. The solution was elegantly simple, almost laughably so. Write "Nale Ba, come tomorrow in Canada" on your door, and the witch would read it, leave, and return the next night to find the same message, stuck in a perpetual loop of deferral, always promised tomorrow but never achieving her goal today. You walk through neighborhoods where faded "Nale Ba" signs still mark some doorways, never painted over even decades later, just in case. The legend inspired a Bollywood film which somehow made it less scary for younger generations who watch it on their phones, but more entrenched in cultural memory, more real through its representation in popular media. April 1st is reportedly celebrated as Nale Ba Day in parts of the city, which strikes you as darkly humorous, commemorating the annual birthday of a legendary witch with pranks and parties, transforming fear into festival. You find yourself checking the doors you pass, noting which ones still carry the protective phrase and which ones have been repainted, trusting modern rationality over traditional protection. And you wonder which choice you'd make if you actually lived here. The 1995 milk miracle draws you to a temple where you watch modern-day worshippers offer milk to a Ganesha idol, spooning the white liquid carefully to the idol's trunk and watching it disappear. Thousands of people across India reported this phenomenon during a fevered September week. Temples overflowing with devotees bringing bottles and containers of milk, and milk sales increased by 30% in Delhi alone during those days. Scientists explained it as capillary action, the milk simply being absorbed by the porous stone, drawn up through microscopic channels by surface tension, a purely physical process with no supernatural component whatsoever. But for believers, it remained a genuine miracle, proof that the divine intersects with the material world, that gods respond to devotion with visible signs. You hold a spoon of milk to the idol's trunk yourself, and whether through capillary action or divine intervention, it does seem to disappear, the level in the spoon dropping as you watch. The boundary between physics and faith shimmers, uncertain, and you realize that maybe both explanations can be true simultaneously, that perhaps the scientific mechanism is simply the method through which the divine expresses itself. Standing in the temple, surrounded by the murmur of prayers and the sweet smell of incense, you find yourself less concerned with explanations and more aware of the comfort these rituals provide to millions. The way faith creates community and meaning, regardless of whether the underlying mechanics are supernatural or mundane. Chennai's De Monte colony draws you south, where a Portuguese resident named De Monte allegedly lived a profoundly miserable existence with a mentally unstable wife and a son who died young, accumulating tragedy in this place until it soaked into the walls and earth. His unhappiness apparently persists beyond death, refusing to release its hold on this neighborhood. Doors open and close on their own, witnesses report, swinging wide at night when no wind blows. Vehicles crash mysteriously, drivers suddenly losing control on straight roads with good visibility. Taxi drivers categorically refuse to enter after dark, and rag pickers who work everywhere else in Chennai avoid this colony entirely. A Tamil horror film was inspired by this legend, which paradoxically made it more famous and thus more studiously avoided, proving that sometimes publicity doesn't help. You walk through during late afternoon, and the neighborhood does seem to carry unusual weight. Houses stand too quiet, without the usual sounds of daily life. No music, no conversation, no children playing. Windows reflect nothing but darkness, even on a sunny day, as though the interiors have somehow absorbed more shadows than physics allows. An absence of the usual community life you'd expect in an Indian neighborhood. A silence that feels deliberately maintained rather than naturally occurring. You take your photographs quickly and leave before the sun gets too low, joining the exodus of delivery workers and visitors who all seem to have the same unspoken agreement that staying after dark would be unwise. In Madhya Pradesh, you visit Bhopal, where the 1984 gas tragedy killed thousands in one of history's worst industrial disasters. And the site is still toxic decades later, still haunted by the spirits of those who died in agony, choking on poisoned air while the world slept. Workers and security guards at the abandoned industrial complex report apparitions, shadowy figures moving through areas that should be empty, sounds of coughing and screaming coming from sealed buildings, the smell of chemicals appearing suddenly in areas that have been cleaned and decontaminated. You stand at the perimeter fence, unable and unwilling to enter the complex itself, and you feel the tragedy soaking the ground, the air, the very molecules of this place. Suffering on this scale leaves permanent marks, and some hauntings seem less supernatural than inevitable. How could such concentrated horror not leave an imprint on reality itself? The Shivpuri Fort in Madhya Pradesh, constructed 2,000 years ago by Veer Khandarao, is said to be haunted by his ghost, which continues to coordinate late-night dance celebrations within the ruined walls. Those who encounter these ghostly gatherings are said to be lucky to escape unscathed, stumbling from the fort with memories of music and laughter that fade like dreams upon waking. The fort is described as practically destroyed, stones scattered and walls crumbled, but with an eerie atmosphere that persists despite the decay. Locals advise strongly against visiting after dusk, and you heed this advice, viewing the ruins from a distance as sunset approaches, and noting how the shadows pool in the collapsed rooms in ways that suggest architecture that shouldn't exist, gathering darkness that seems thicker than mere absence of light. In Jammu and Kashmir, the Gaukadal Bridge carries the weight of the 1991 massacre, when CRPF officers reportedly opened fire on protesters. The bullets tearing through the crowd and leaving dozens dead, their bodies falling into the water or collapsing onto the bridge itself. Since then, paranormal activities plagued the area. Ghostly apparitions wearing the clothes of protesters, strange voices calling out slogans or screams, a pervasive sense of angry spirits demanding acknowledgement of injustice that was never properly addressed. You walk across the bridge in broad daylight, surrounded by traffic and normal life, vendors selling fruit and newspapers, but underneath it all, beneath the ordinary sounds and activities, you feel the sorrow. Trauma this profound doesn't simply fade, it echoes forward through time. And you're walking through those echoes now, feeling the weight of unresolved grief pressing against your chest. Kuni Nala on the Jammu Kashmir highway earns its name, Bloody Tunnel. Through sheer accumulation of deaths, road accidents occurring here with almost statistically impossible frequency, The stretch of road approaches and passes through a tunnel where so many people have died that locals attribute supernatural causes rather than accept simple coincidence or dangerous road conditions. They speak of a woman in black carrying a baby who appears at the roadside, asking for rides with desperate urgency. Refuse her, and you're cursed to eventually die on this stretch of road, your vehicle inexplicably losing control or another driver swerving into your path. Accept her, and, well, no one who's accepted has reliably reported what happens, which is its own kind of unsettling. You drive through during the day, gripping the steering wheel perhaps tighter than necessary, hyper aware of every vehicle approaching from the opposite direction, every curve in the road ahead. And you see her, or think you do, standing at the roadside, wrapped in dark clothing and holding something that might be a bundled infant. But it might just be a woman in a black shawl carrying groceries. Nothing supernatural about it. Just a person waiting for a bus or a relative to pick her up. You don't stop to verify, accelerating past and watching in your rear-view mirror as the figure diminishes with distance. Later, you're not entirely sure if she was there at all or if expectation created the vision, but either way, you're relieved to clear the tunnel and emerge onto safer road. Udhampur Army Quarters reports ghostly apparitions between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Those hours the spiritual traditions call the witching hour, when the boundary between worlds grows thin. Floating figures that fade in and out of visibility. Strange noises that sound like furniture moving in empty rooms. Inexplicable lights appearing in windows of buildings that have no electricity. Soldiers stationed here. People trained to face combat without flinching. Men and women who've chosen military service knowing its dangers admit to genuine fear during these hours. You're not permitted inside military quarters as a civilian, but you speak with soldiers in a nearby tea shop, and they describe their experiences with the matter-of-fact tone of people reporting weather conditions. It's not theatrical for them. It's simply part of the assignment. Another difficulty to endure alongside the cold and the altitude and the separation from family. In Chhattisgarh, Lal Bangla of Raipur stands abandoned near the Sarakati interchange, site of a doctor and his daughter's encounter with an evil spirit during a lunar eclipse in 1994. The father died mysteriously afterward, his death attributed by locals to the spirit's curse, and the youth villa has remained empty since, slowly decaying, becoming overgrown, transforming into exactly the kind of place that looks haunted even if nothing supernatural had ever occurred there. You approach it carefully, respectfully, noting the overgrown garden where plants have grown wild and reclaimed the cultivated space, broken windows that stare like empty eye sockets, graffiti on walls that testifies to braver or more foolish visitors than yourself, but also that peculiar quality of abandonment that suggests people aren't avoiding it merely because it's old and empty, but because it's actively unwelcoming, radiating a sense of stay away that bypasses rational thought. You don't enter. The doorway seems darker than physics should allow. Shadows pooling there with unnatural density, and you've learned to trust your instincts about thresholds and boundaries. Some doors shouldn't be crossed. Some invitations shouldn't be accepted, and standing in front of Lal Bangla with afternoon sun warm on your back and that dark doorway yawning open before you, you understand that this is one of those moments when wisdom means retreat. And here you are now, having traveled through shadows and stories, having stood in places where the boundary between this world and whatever lies beyond seems particularly thin. You've accumulated miles and legends, photographs and sensations, moments of fear and wonder that will stay with you in ways you can't yet fully predict. You're exhausted, your mind overfull with images of abandoned villages and cursed roads and spirits who refuse to depart. But you're also richer somehow, carrying these narratives that have survived centuries because they speak to something fundamental in human experience. These stories acknowledge that despite our technology and rationality, we still don't understand everything, and perhaps that's okay. Perhaps mystery serves a purpose, keeping us humble, keeping us aware that we're not the only presence occupying this world. Perhaps fear in measured doses reminds us that we're alive and vulnerable and connected to everyone who's ever felt that same primal terror in the dark. So now, as the journey ends and you find yourself back in your own bed, in your own room, with your own familiar walls around you, let yourself sink into the pillows. Let your breathing slow and deepen, finding its natural rhythm. These legends you've encountered, they're not coming for you tonight. They're rooted in their specific places, bound to their particular histories, anchored by geography and tradition. You're safe here. The night outside your window is just a night. Darkness just an absence of light. Nothing more than photons not reaching your eyes. Your eyelids grow heavy with the weight of all these stories, and that's exactly what they are, stories. Beautiful, terrifying, persistent stories that help people make sense of tragedy and loss and the inexplicable moments that punctuate ordinary lives. Stories that transform random suffering into narrative, that give meaning to meaningless deaths, that create community through shared fear and shared wonder. Sleep now, easily and deeply. Let the whispers fade into the background noise of your mind where dreams live. Let the images blur into that soft space between memory and imagination. You've survived your journey through India's urban legends, and that's no small accomplishment. You've listened respectfully, observed carefully, and you're leaving with more questions than answers, which is perhaps the most honest response to mystery. Close your eyes now. Feel yourself sinking deeper into the mattress, your body growing heavier, your thoughts growing softer and less defined. The room around you is safe and familiar. The sounds you hear are ordinary. Traffic, neighbors, the hum of electricity in the walls. Nothing supernatural, nothing threatening. Just the comfortable, mundane world where most of life actually happens, between the legends. Breathe deeply, in and out, slow and steady. Let tension drain from your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. You're safe, you're home. The stories will be there tomorrow if you want to revisit them, but for now, for this moment, you can rest. You're drifting now, floating on that edge between waking and sleeping, and that's exactly where you should be. Let go of the day. Let go of the journey. Let go of everything except this gentle descent into sleep. You're safe. You're home. Everything is exactly as it should be. Sleep well.